All right, so we're gonna somewhat briefly touch on notifications, legal, and chain of command. Part of the reason that it's going to be brief is that this is stuff that you should already have a very good working knowledge of just as a paramedic in our system or as a paramedic certified in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Steve brought up, before we jump into this, a discussion point that I think is worth us having a little bit further of a deep dive discussion on, related to the day-to-day interactions on the Alpha Bravo Charlie event types of ALS 401 plus engine whatever plus transport unit whatever are all on scene. The patient is sick, so the decision is made that either we need to have at least one, if not multiple paramedics transporting in, and how do we navigate that with suppression unit, sending medic to the hospital, us going to the hospital. Expand further on your initial question.
No, that was pretty much it. So if it's an Alpha that requires 2 ALS providers, it doesn't necessarily need everybody off of every rig in the back, making that decision of the medic off the AFR versus you, or if it's a Bravo call that just needs 1 ALS provider going with an ambulance, is it the AFR medic or is it you?
And I'll give you my way of thinking about this, and then I want to hear y'all's way of thinking about this as well. Today, if I get dispatched on whatever, and I'm on scene and realize, okay, I need another ALS provider or a ALS provider needs to go to the hospital on this. If it is something that requires multiple providers, so a cardiac arrest, you've got a medic unit as well as an AFR unit, they're going to be transporting, there's no need for additional skills, but there's need for multiple sets of hands. AFR unit, you're already going to have to go out of service because there's multiple folks that need to go to the hospital on this. If, for my unit, if they need blood products, okay, I'm going. That's the only thing that I'm really showing up that's different to the table other than experience. That'll be my decision maker there. If it's a single role, then it's an easy, hey, I'm going to go take care of my buggy, figure this out. And I think it's going to depend on what the situation is. So you guys talk with me about your thought process, because the intent of the EMS specialist program is not to have folks that ride on fire trucks never go to the hospital. That's not the system that we work in, nor is it a system that we can sustain. There's still going to be a need for the engine companies, the truck companies, the rescue companies that are on EMS calls to still send their medic and crew to the hospital based off of the needs. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think in an ideal world with no egos, it is situationally dependent. Rocco is very aware of my opinions on keeping water in the first move or the lack of thereof. But, you know, if we get there first, there's no reason to pass it off to the medic on the AFR, just so we can go in service. On the flip side, if they're first, they've already established care and had a rapport with the patient. You know what, that thing's got 6 wheels, it can go to the hospital too.
Yeah.
On the flip side, if they're trying to make a drill or we're trying to make a drill, like, I would love to have a hard and fast rule, but I don't think a hard and fast rule works in this scenario. I think the challenge is going to become, there are still certainly those officers out there that are going to see these as freebie medics floating around in cars, and I'm going back in service for the big one.
Yeah.
And we'll do everything possible to not to go to the hospital to pick up their medic. So I think those are the sticky ones that it's worth talking about how we're going to address.
Yep.
Or how Rocco's going to address that with senior leadership.
And that's part of it, is getting to know and getting the feedback of, hey, this is what I'm seeing, this is how I'm being utilized. Was that actually the intent, so that we can address that? The one RSI that we've had in the county thus far, Chris Seaman was not on a Charlie when that went out. And I say that because he had spent pretty much the entire afternoon putting AFR units in service. Hey, I'm gonna run this call in Tyson's. Hey, I'm gonna run this call in Tyson's. Just, I'm trying to make their life easier. And luckily that call hit at a time that was appropriate for him to be in service and was able to be there for the high acuity need. And we are balancing that of keeping units in service, making sure that we have that second call resiliency, but also making sure that we have the availability of the advanced resource, because if if the blood product is currently on its way up to the hospital with something that didn't need to have blood products, then that may be a miss. And that's unfortunately just a part of having only certain finite resources. So I think that having conversations with folks and making sure that there is like, hey, sometimes it's going to be me and sometimes it's going to be you, and we need to come up with what's best in real time. And the benefit of how we're doing things on 24-hour shift versus a 12-hour pilot program is when you guys clear that call at 7 o'clock at night, you're still going to run more calls the rest of the shift as well. So there is a need for buy-in from everybody on that scene or everybody in the department to make sure that we're able to continue working well together. Where before it was, well, I'm not going to see you probably for another couple days because we don't work the same shift schedule. So, but
there's going to be a communication piece to that. I missed some of the conversation, but I can only assume what it was. There's going to be a communication piece to this. There's going to be an informational bulletin coming out that no one reads, right? There's going to be a shift teleconference, Teams meeting, a teleconference with the VCs and the DCs to lay out clearly what the expectations, goals, and responsibilities are of this group. And that's an opportunity for them to ask those questions, right? John produced an infographic that's going to go out as well for the entire department. There's going to be constant communication. This is when you guys are in play, and the level of autonomy that this group has is pretty significant. So if you are on that Charlie call and that critical need does come in, hey, you got this. I'm going to this call because I'm a valuable asset, number one, and I'm a limited resource, number two, and I have the equipment to solve that problem. This is a Charlie call. You have the equipment and the expertise to solve that call, but they need me over here, and I'm in that 10-minute response window where I can make a significant difference. You are going to have your outliers. You're going to have some very aggressive individuals, probably all ranks, that are going to challenge that. But you guys have a chain of command. You've got John Winstead, you've got Todd Barb, that are going to be your first line of defense, and you have your own personal experiences and how you tactfully address that situation, either in the moment or a little bit after the incident has been handled. John Bailey will tell you, the EMS specialists faced some serious challenges last year in their pilot year. There were a lot of cases a lot of instances where there were some real cultural issues that were embedded with a certain group of folks.
Cool. And
we'll deal with it.
Yeah, and the people, honestly, the people that I ran calls with the most were the easiest to get along with. And because I had built that level of trust and that level of like shared ownership on like every call, right? Like even the most simple call. I gotta tell you, like by the time I ended my time there, like I was fighting people to try to like write an ALS call in. I'd be like, hey, I'll write this in, whatever you guys, and they'll be like, oh no, we'll take it, no problem, we'll write it to the hospital. Like, so you can, it's not gonna be the same obviously for every engine or truck company, right? But you can build relationships where they understand the goal of the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I do like the thing that you mentioned about who's made patient contact first.
Yeah,
that makes a huge, easy thing for us to work through. Like, do I have a relationship with this patient already? Do you have a relationship with this patient already? And if we're being honest about our resource depth, we have some very, very sufficient and robust resources in a lot of directions. So either way, and no matter what you take out of service, if you need a truck, you're gonna not have a truck. If you need an engine, you're not going to have an engine. If you need a advanced scope of practice paramedic, you're not going to have an advanced scope of practice paramedic. So continue the dialogue. We'll continue to try to flush through what makes the most sense. But cool. So touching briefly on notifications, legal, and then I think we've pretty well beat chain of command to death. But again, part of the reason that I say that you guys should have a pretty decent working understanding of this is that this is straight out of the EMS manual. So the reason we bring this up is that everybody who went through an ALS internship at some point has been talked with or tested on these notifications, but you're gonna get the phone call of, hey, am I supposed to call somebody on this? Or you'll be on scene of the construction accident and we're wrapping things up and you realize, hey, did we ever notify Vosh? So what are the things that we must potentially end up in bad spot of not making notifications up. And the first one should be obvious because it's at the top. So medication error is one that we need to make notifications and do the correct stuff for moving forward. But which one has legal responsibilities of like you potentially going to lose your job over? APS and CPS. So the abuse, neglect, exploitation. We're mandated reporters not by the fire and rescue department or not by somebody who lets us practice medicine. We're mandated by the state government. So be aware of.
I was going to say the one caveat to add to how is there's now the Survey 123 app, which when we built it, talking to APS and CPS, they actually prefer to receive it that way. So you still certainly can call it. However, they actually prefer to receive it via email, which is how the Survey 123 app says.
And I'm assuming that that's why I'm now getting emails saying when somebody makes those referrals as opposed to, which is nice from a awareness perspective for the EMS supervisors of knowing what's going on, especially if you're covering all of Division 1 as the EMS supervisor. It's nice to know what is potentially going to pop up on your radar.
Our reps will look up who the EMS supervisor is and CC them.
So we know the indications for these things. Sometimes it gets a little bit of gray area, and that's often when you'll get a phone call from somebody of like, hey, I'm not sure whether I need to make the notification or not on this. And those of you who have been doing this for far longer than I have, specifically from a legal side of things, back me up on whether I'm correct with this or not. But I would rather err on the side of notifying and there not be something going on than to, it doesn't really sound like it rises to that level, and then find out that, no, we definitely should have. So.
For the mandatories?
The one key thing is
Suspicion.
telling the ER is not does not fulfill the requirement.
Correct. They are also mandated reporters, but everyone in this chain needs to make a notification.
The threshold suspicion, reasonable suspicion.
Yeah.
The one thing I will add to that, and we've had a couple of these in the last couple of months, where somebody has made an APS or CPS referral, and then the APS and CPS person reaches out to the provider that filed it, which is fine for follow-up. But then APS and CPS is asking for a copy of the report, which they're entitled to under HIPAA using minimum necessary. So rather than either you guys or instructing your crews to print the report, just forward them to the incident report officer or the FOIA office, and they will produce it for them.
Yeah.
We never hand out.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a good rule of thumb that we don't ever reports information, and it's amazing how quickly you can get into a spot where you have convinced yourself, oh, it's reasonable for me to let this person know what's going on, and then realize, no, this is not okay. Nothing, unless they are on scene with the patient, and Steve can get more granular.
There are a lot of mandatory disclosures, there are a lot of permitted disclosures. None of them mandate instantaneous disclosure. So when in doubt, route requests either to my position that I'm getting ready to vacate or the FOIA office of the local route.
And that's something important to note with this chart is the time frame. There's almost nothing that is like right now, with the exception of the mandated reporting of abuse. And obviously that's at the emergency department, not stopping patient care to make that notification. So everything else, we have some time. So adverse events, going to Tim, what you just mentioned about medication error, but airway errors, patient injuries. So you guys are going to be that first point of contact. So when somebody calls and says, hey, I just did X, or hey, I think we may have a problem, knowing what the next steps in those process are. Sir?
Does the chase car EMS specialist count as the EMS officer for like people in the field?
They're going to be, so, and we need to talk about the terminology because we have used the term EMS captain, EMS supervisor, and EMS officer all interchangeably. And so we have not settled on a final decision about what that correct terminology is. EMS captain refers to the rank and makes it very clear that, okay, this person is this, but it doesn't clarify when there is somebody that's backfilling from a lieutenant or battalion chief level. It causes some confusion potentially. EMS officer implies everybody who is an officer who is riding in an EMS role. EMS supervisor kind of more narrowly hits, but it also has, since 1989, meant something specifically. So I don't know if this is the forum to have the discussion of what is that term, but your question is valid because we do need to specify.
I think if someone called me and I go, oh, good try, but.
So, and this is a perfect example of when you're riding down at station 9 as ALS 402 and your phone rings and they say, hey man, so I think I just gave a med that's not correct. You are still going to be that intake point, but you're then also going to pick up the phone and call EMS 402 to notify them like, hey, this is what's going on, and now I'm turning over to you. Because I don't want them to try to figure out the phone calls, but they need to make contact with their closest EMS related person, and then it gets kicked up to the EMS supervisors because the lieutenants are not expected to be doing EMS inquiry intake, investigations, that type of stuff. That's not the intent of that role. But answering a phone call, it's no different, and we're modeling it after basically the way that safety programs does stuff of firefighter, whoever just twisted their knee, the lieutenant's gonna start the process and it gets elevated to the safety officer. It's gonna be the same with elevating for EMS inquiry, investigation, whatever else needs to happen.
So on that same track of, will I be able to do high-risk refusals, do the hoarding stuff, or is that?
Yep, that's, so those on-scene things, nothing special or crazy. I think that we've landed on the fact that if we're at the ECO level, that's still something that probably needs to have a captain involved with and engaged with. Mostly because that's also not a fast process by any stretch of the imagination. And we're gonna have some brief discussion of that, I think in 2 days, but it's something that we could probably flesh out more. But the stuff that's occurring on scene, pretty interchangeable. The stuff that's happening for the administration level is where we start to get the true deviation of which one is which. So, clear as mud.
Around the notification of the Office of the Medical Director within 24 hours, that's because around blood, cricothyroidotomy, and when we implement more broadly RSI, our commitment is to debrief and review the case within 24 hours of its event. So that's the only way that we can meet that is if we know about it. So feel free to call us when it happens.
Doesn't the ECR automatically email you as well, though?
We want to talk to you real time about the case that just happened and begin the debriefing process.
They want to call, they want to phone.
Yeah.
It's also, as infrequent as the procedure is happening, it's good for you guys to know that it has happened.
I mean, that's our commitment to it. That's kind of like a big step, so, yeah.
So that covers kind of the next couple of big things. Cyanogen administration falls into the same 24-hour period for somewhat different reasons. Part of that was the replacement process, making sure that folks knew about it, but same type of deal. ECO, that's one of the few that pops up on here as an on-scene thing. So we're going to talk a little bit more later on about emergency custody orders, yeah, we'll table that until I think it's day 3 that we're talking about ECOs rather than getting into it here. Equipment leaving a county. So this is one that comes up somewhat often, and whether it actually gets notification or not. Part of the reason that I say that is if you work on any of the Maryland border areas or any of the borders with other counties, if you read this to a very extreme letter of the law, it's saying that if you transport to an out-of-county or an out-of-state jurisdiction, the EMS supervisor and the UFO are supposed to get notified about that. Be reasonable about that. But if somebody calls you and says, hey, I'm getting ready to transport to Sibley, and they're on that side of the county, like, okay, cool, thank you for the notification. At least I know where they're going. Nothing that you then need to go with that. If somebody calls you and says, hey, I'm headed to VCU, okay, that one I might actually need to know a little bit about and also come up with a plan of how you're going to refuel on the way back. So
part of the origin story about the out-of-state transport notifications were primarily around those driven purely by like patient choice, not burn center transport and such. And that was a nod to county legal's desire to have a check and balance on transports out of the state based on risk management tenets.
DC is a little bit of a different landscape than Maryland as well with regard to
We're
that.
non-indemnified and the awards are much higher. So in deference for them to allow us to continue transporting appropriate clinical indications, that was our agreement.
yeah. something that continually comes up, and I'm just going to repeat what Beth has said, is when it comes to questions about patient destination decisions, no matter how we arrive at the decision that we make, explaining that with the patient or caregivers or other invested stakeholders pays big dividends, as opposed to just doing something and not providing them with any information. And I think that would solve a lot of the problems that we deal with from the Office of the Fire Chief complaint line. I don't think that's what they call it, but that's what I think it probably is. Extraordinary care. So what do we mean by that? Something that exceeds the normal, everyday, what's written in the EMS manual as the things that we would normally expect. So probably not something that we're getting notified a lot about, but
I'm trying to think of like things that have met it in the past, like things outside protocol that aren't online medical direction. Things are actually even required and referenced in regulation, hence the protocol.
So not something that we're dealing with a ton. Again, things that probably are not directly EMS, but that we may be the pinch point where we realize this. So flame impingement. We actually ran this not too long ago where a person lit themselves on fire inadvertently during a prayer. They had whatever loose clothing on right next to candles. Clearly direct flame impingement on this person. Fairfax 1 facilitated the transport to the burn center after RSI. And we made the notifications to the FM's office. And to give you an idea about how infrequently the investigators deal with this, they didn't send anybody to the scene. They were like, oh, okay, cool, thanks for the heads up, and never did anything with it. And then when their deputy chief found out about it, it became a huge issue because that woman, I think, actually eventually died. So they were very, very concerned about it. So it's not uncommon where we're the ones who realize, like, hey, we probably need to tell somebody about this. So the flame impingement, bomb, chemical burns, fireworks. Any of those ones that it doesn't, again, this was one that was dispatched as I think a Bravo initially before it eventually got upgraded to a still alarm when they realized that this woman was on fire in the house. It's not uncommon for us to have things that get mismatched from notification perspectives. High-risk refusals. So I had been saying that we were messaging about high-risk refusals but didn't have an actual protocol related to high-risk refusals. And it's in here. I don't think that we have actually a protocol that has that as the name at the top of it. But one of the more common things that we get called out for, obviously, is to assist with a high-risk refusal. One of the biggest places that we take on a level of responsibility from a legal perspective is when we're the last point of medical contact. We all kind of have an understanding of that. When we leave somebody on scene, we're kind of the last folks to have any say in what's going on with them, whereas if we transport them to a hospital, even if we miss the mark on multiple other levels, we probably are not absolved, but have limited our legal liability to some degree because we're no longer the last chain or last link in this chain. So a lot of our providers appropriately will ask for, hey, I want to run this by you before I just sign this off. So if it seems like sometimes you are getting called for high-risk refusals to make sure that they've done everything correctly, that may actually be what their goal is. And the way that you handle this may change based off of the proximity to the call, what is going on with the call. These may be ones that you get a phone call and you're okay with, like, having a discussion over the phone of, have you asked these questions? Have we had these discussions? Do I come in line with you on the fact that, hey, we want this person to go to the hospital, but they're clearly not incapable of making decisions for themselves, versus, okay, I need to be in their living room with you, versus I need to run really fast to be in the living room with them. And that kind of branches over of ECO versus high-risk refusal. Is there a requirement for, is there, and I ask this open-ended, feel free to be honest with me. Is there a difference between, or is there any refusal that doesn't have risk associated with it? I see some no's. There's no such thing as a true low-risk refusal. There are refusals that carry greater risk with them, like the person who lives out in the woods that doesn't have cell access and doesn't have a family member to be able to call us if they have a follow-up issue. But don't be surprised when these are ones that you get asked to respond out to assist, and we're there to make sure that we're covering our bases from a liability perspective, but more importantly, to make sure that we're providing the right care to the patient. Thoughts or things to add here? The other thing from a normalizing the way that we do things perspective, one of the first conversations that I had when I started in this role was telling folks, hey, if I ask you to give me a call, I'm not trying to get out of responding to you. I'm trying to start the ball rolling by phone before you wait 25 minutes for me to respond non-emergent across the county to you. So letting folks know why are you asking for them to give you a call so that you can work through this.
Yeah, I think with those a lot of times as well, most of the people I talk to understand the risk. They've already communicated exactly what I would have communicated with them, but you're just double checking, like, hey, did they verbalize that they understand the risk? Did they give a reason, right? Is there somebody else with them at the home who could be with them in case something goes wrong? Okay, awesome. You've already answered all those questions. I love it. Make sure you document that. You know what I mean? You're just reiterating the proper steps to kind of limit our risk.
Yep. Hoarding, we already touched on. It's just part of the process of getting that stuff inputted and making sure that we haven't left the scene before we're able to get the hoarding task force, which, did they dissolve the hoarding task force or does it still exist? Okay. So making sure that those notifications are done. Hunting accident, if you don't know, there is actually a large amount of hunting that happens in Fairfax County, specifically in the parks. And it is a state requirement that we make notification for hunting accidents to the game warden. So one of the weird ones that no one will probably ever think about, but then when you get called out to Pohick Park or something for the guy who accidentally shot himself with his bow, you're probably going to be the only person who, falling out of the tree stand, hangman harness syndrome, any of those things. It's not going to get dispatched as a hunting accident and trigger ideas for folks of, I need to make a notification for this, but the responsibility remains.
How much info are they going to be asking? Like, that's a different one when it comes
It's not a lot, and again, it's one of those things where when they start asking questions for a lot of stuff, then I'm going to get on the phone with Steve or Steve's successor to find out what am I able to release.
It does seem like it's like a little fine line in it. Like, I would assume they want to know who the person is, but past that, I don't.
I honestly,
So HIPAA basically says is sort of the basement of what you can release, but it also has a caveat that if there is a state or other federal law that compels reporting of protected health information, you're allowed to. So in this case, hunting accidents are a mandated reporting. Minimum necessary applies. So basic demographics, basic scenario of seeing, like, they don't need the entire ECR, they don't need the entire medical industry, but what happened? And in terms of detail, they're not going to be super detailed. They're not going to ask you whether it's 2 to 3 or 5 by 6. Like,
Where did it
fell out of his
happen?
tree stand,
What's the
dude shot
patient's
himself in
name?
the
How
foot.
do you contact
they're
them?
more going to be confused of, are you sure you didn't say Fauquier County? You said Fairfax County?
It's from code, 29.
So inability to follow orders kind of lumps in underneath of the high-risk refusal / ECO pathway. Or is that intended to say that you're unable to follow medical direction orders?
Yeah, unable.
That is the intent?
As if they tell you to do something, you're like, I'm not doing that.
I don't happen to have propofol, so I won't be hanging it.
It's as much of anything of, that's not the right thing to do, I'm not doing it.
Yeah,
It's to notify us so that we can go on the tail end and work through that,
gotcha.
so that we're not hearing about it from someone else first.
Yep. Investigation, again, the intake of problems is going to happen at the lieutenant level. The dealing with problems is happening at the captain level, so that will get shifted up. Domestic violence, PD not on scene, so we probably may or may not get notified of that because we're not in that notification pathway. But I could very quickly see where somebody calls you to ask, like, hey, what should I do with this? So knowing that if we're suspecting domestic violence, notifying either the attending physician and PD prior to clearing from the call, knowing the limitations of what we're able to disclose if the cops were never on the scene. Transportation of the deceased, try to avoid it as much as possible. That's
Our so challenging ones, right, which John said, try to avoid them as much as possible. One of those ways is they're never dead in the back of my transport unit. They're either dead at the location or they're
Profoundly bradycardic.
Yeah.
Right.
Very unstable, performing resuscitation until I get into the hospital, but never pronounced when in the back of my transport unit.
Yeah, I think the hard ones are the circling the drain with the DNR, but the family wants.
And we continue to provide supportive care until they reach the hospital.
And around the DNR, you're by regulation not able to pronounce patients. Only licensed practitioners can. So if you don't call them to ask permission to terminate,
You're not done.
then they're not dead yet by regulation.
I'm bringing them to
So
you.
that's the seam in the defense.
And you just have to suck
And that's
up
where I
a little
say,
silly
oh,
with the
they
patient on
just
oxygen.
lost vitals. Define just.
Yeah.
20 minutes ago.
And the last one, the workplace injury, not violence. VOSH needs to be notified if there's a workplace injury. Specifically, they're focused really heavily on like construction and industrial type of stuff, but I would put it in their court to decide if they give a crap about the office worker who is injured from it's a serious injury is what they're looking for, not somebody twisted their ankle.
They are concerned when it's people who get electrocuted by the copy machine or being zapped by their laptop plug-in.
That makes sense.
Should that be the provider, or should that be like the first in suppression OIC?
The person who normally does it, honestly, is either an officer or a battalion chief, at least in my experience. Because a lot of these, again, they are under like the industrial accident side of things. Like,
Like if there's PD there, I've asked before, like, hey, are you all gonna make the note? Is that qualified? Like I've had workplace death,
Yeah,
and I'm
I
like,
agree.
hey, are you? I'm like, hey, I know we need to notify Bosch. Are
Did
you?
you call
Hmm?
OSHA on yourself?
No, I did not call OSHA on myself when I cut myself in the car accident. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's what I was.
So that's your
I've asked
Yeah.
cops and
So I've just made it like, hey, the cops know this is a workplace accident.
Yeah.
We're now investigating.
and that's honestly,
Go forth.
bear in mind that any of the staffing issues that we have had in our department, they're so much worse for the cops. And I've been finding myself more and more notifying the police officers of like, hey, are you interested in this? Like not to give too much information, but a near drowning patient who like, hey, I don't mean to point you in a direction, but I have no idea how this person wound up in the water, whether it was something that needs to be investigated as a crime or not. Are you going to investigate it as a crime? And the guy goes, oh, maybe. Well, you are the only one here with a gun and a badge, so.
There's some young officers.
Yeah, just advocate for folks. Look out for the things that are not the common situations. That's really what this job historically has been really driven by. So, so those are the big notification stuff. From the liability perspective, we already kind of touched on it, but making sure that we're not putting the department or ourselves into a position where we're at risk. So the abandonment aspect. So one of the things that was brought up with the 3 EMS captains and the 3 EMS specialists in the county is, well, why don't we just follow the same concept as the safety officers? They're able to cover the county with just 3 units. Why is that not the same? They don't have the aspect of abandonment with their job. When they're doing an accident investigation or they're doing paperwork or they're assisting with something, they can drop what they're doing and go on another call. You guys may be put into a position where you're trying to decide, can I free up to go on this other call? And the answer may be no legally. If you are engaged with paramedic level patient care and you need to continue caring for this patient, you're locked in. And it's not, when you're on a medic unit, it's a lot easier because, well, my stretcher's occupied. I'm clearly not going anywhere. But when you have that draw of, hey, there's a kid in cardiac arrest up the street, and I would really like to be able to clear up to go run that, but make sure that you're not putting yourself into the position where you are abandoning your current patient in the interest of trying to assist somebody else. Make good decisions, but know the background of, can I make this decision or not? Any other things to add there? The sole provider role is one of the few places where we actually could get into a spot where we're abandoning folks pre-hospitally. Okay? Hearing none. Already talked about refusals. Last point of medical contact, know that that's where we own a fair amount of liability. So again, that's a big thing that we need to be aware of. And then consent, we're going to deep dive more into related to emergency custody orders and aid to decision-making capacity, those types of things. So we're going to discuss that more at a later date.